He kept thinking that Christmas would soon come, and how nice it would be when it finally began to snow properly. "Snow will come in buckets," said little Ida, for that's what they say in Smarland when it snows a lot. And snow it did. It began as soon as it got dark, getting heavier and heavier, and the snow whirled down so that you could hardly see the farmyard when you looked through the windows. "There's going to be a real blizzard," said Crosamaya. "How am I going to get home?" "Well, you'll have to stay here the night," said Emil's mother. "You can sleep on the kitchen sofa with Lena." "All right, but you must lie as still as a dead pig," said Lena, "because you know how ticklish I am." After supper, Alfred complained about his thumb. He said it was hurting a lot, so Emil's mother unwound the bandage to see how it was healing. She didn't like the look of it at all. It was horrible. It was sore and red and swollen, and from Alfred's wrist there were red streaks running a little way up his arm. Crossamaya's eyes began to gleam. "Ooh, blood poisoning," she said. "That's very serious." Emil's mother fetched a bottle of medicine and put a poultice on Alfred's hand and forearm. "If it's not better by morning, you'd better go to the doctor in Marienlund," she said. That night, all over Smarland, the snowstorm raged worse than anyone could remember ever having seen before, and when they woke in the morning at Cuttle, the whole farmyard was covered in one big soft white snowdrift. The storm continued to rage. It snowed and blew so hard that you could barely put your nose outside, and the wind whistled down the chimney. No one had ever seen the like of it. "Alfred will have to shovel snow all day," said Lena, "though he might as well not bother, as it won't do any good." But Alfred didn't shovel snow that day or any day. When they all sat down to breakfast, his place at the kitchen table was empty, and there was no sign of him. Emil was worried. He put on his cap and his thick winter coat and went out. He picked up the snow shovel by the kitchen door and quickly cleared a path to the farmhand's hut next to the tool shed. Lena watched him through the window and nodded approvingly. How clever to think of Emil clearing a path to the tool shed. Then he'll be ready for when he has to go there. Silly Lena. She didn't realise that Emil was going to see Alfred. It felt very cold in the hut when Emil stepped inside. Alfred hadn't lit the stove. He lay on his bed and wouldn't get up. He didn't want any food either. He wasn't hungry, he said. Well, that made Emil even more worried. If Alfred wasn't hungry, there was something seriously wrong with him. Emil put some wood on the stove and lit it, and then he went to fetch his mother. She came, and so did all the others, Emil's father and Lena and Crosamaya and little Ida, for now they were all worried about Alfred. Poor Alfred. He just lay there with his eyes closed. He was hot as a chimney, and yet he was shivering. The red streaks which had crept right up his armpits looked terrible. Crosamaya nodded her head knowingly. "When those streaks reach the heart, that'll be the end of it. He'll die." "Be quiet," said Emil's mother. But it wasn't so easy to silence Crosamaya. She knew of at least 6 people in Lonnenberger parish alone who had died of blood poisoning, and she insisted on counting them all upon her fingers one by one. "But that doesn't mean that we must give up hope for Alfred," she said. She thought it might help if they took a lock of his hair and a piece of his shirt and buried them at midnight to the north of the house, and then said a really good charm. She knew one, she said. "Fie, fie, may what come from the devil go back to the devil. Fie, fie." But Emil's father said that the swear word Alfred had said when he cut his thumb was quite enough, and if anything was to be buried to the north of the house in midnight in this weather, Crosamaya could do it herself. Crosamaya shook her head gloomily. "Nature will take its toll, oh dear me, yes." Emil was furious. "What sort of old wives' talk is that? Alfred will soon be better, do you understand?" Then Crosamaya changed her tone and said, "Yes, of course, Emil, my boy, of course he'll be better." And just to be on the safe side, she patted Alfred as he laid there and added loudly, "Of course you'll be better, Alfred, of course you will." Then she looked at the door and muttered to herself, "But I don't know how they're going to get the coffin through that narrow door." Emil heard her and began to cry. He tugged anxiously at his father's coat. "We must take Alfred to the doctor at Marienlund, like Mamma said." Emil's father and mother looked at each other. They knew it was going to be impossible to get to Marienlund that day. It was quite hopeless, but it was difficult to bluntly tell Emil that when he stood there looking so upset. Really, Emil's father and mother wanted to help Alfred in any way they could, but they just didn't know what they could do, and so they didn't know what to say to Emil. Emil's father slouched away from the hut without saying anything, but Emil didn't give up. He followed his father round, crying and pleading and shouting and threatening, and just think his father didn't get cross but simply answered quietly, "We can't do anything, Emil, you know we can't." Lena sat in the kitchen, crying her eyes out and saying, "And there's me, thinking we'd get married in the spring, so goodbye to all of that. It's all over with Alfred, and here I am, left with 4 sheets and a whole dozen towels. That's a fine set of affairs." At last Emil knew it was true. There was nothing they could do. He went back to the hut and sat with Alfred all day. It was the longest day of his life. Alfred lay with his eyes shut, but once in a while he opened them, and every time he said, "Ah, there you are, Emil." As Emil watched the snow whirling down outside the window, his hatred for the snow was so intense and fiery that it ought to have been able to melt every snowflake in Lonnenberger and the whole of Smarland, but it didn't. Instead, the snow came down so heavily that he thought the whole world was going to perish in it. Winter days are short, even if they seem long, for the people who are sitting and waiting like Emil was. It was getting dusk and soon it would be dark. "Ah, there you are, Emil," said Alfred again, but it was more difficult for him to get the words out now. Emil's mother brought out some meat broth and made Emil drink it. She tried to get Alfred to have some too, but he didn't want any. Emil's mother sighed and went away. Quite late in the evening, Lena came to say it was Emil's bedtime. He must know how late it was. "I'm going to sleep on the floor next to Alfred," said Emil, and that is what he did. He scouted round for an old mattress and a heavy blanket. That was all he needed to sleep on. But he couldn't sleep. He could only lie awake and watch the fire dying in the stove as he listened to Alfred's alarm clock ticking and Alfred's rapid breathing and the moans he made from time to time. He dozed now and then, but every so often he woke with a sudden start and felt guilty. As the night went on, he felt more and more how wrong it was and how it would all soon be too late forever to do anything about it. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Emil made up his mind what he must do. He must take Alfred to the doctor at Marienlund, even if both he and Alfred died in the attempt.